All right, hello and welcome to CSTL. My name is Aaron Pelker and I'm a Community Engagement Coordinator at the Missouri History Museum. And I want to thank you for spending part of your day with us. Before we get to today's presentation on Streets of St. Louis, Broadway, I'd like to take a minute to thank two key contributors that help make programs like this possible: city and county residents and their contributions through the Zoo Museum Tax District, and our museum members. If you're already a member, I do want to thank you for your generosity. If you're not, but would like to learn more about the membership process, please visit mohistory.org/support. With that, I'd like to introduce today's featured speaker, Amanda Clark, Community Tours Manager. Thanks for finding yourself here. Enjoy, and take it away, Amanda.
Thanks, Aaron. Hello, and as Aaron said, we're going to be looking at Broadway today. This is part of a new series in the STL History Live lineup, where as part of the CSTL tours, I'm going to be doing a virtual tour of just one street at a time. And so in the future, I'll be doing Kings Highway and Grand Avenue, and then probably some other streets as well. So today we're going to be seeing Broadway from top to bottom. First of all, who am I? So hi. I'm Amanda Clark, and as Aaron said, I'm the Community Tours Manager, which is a new program here at the museum, a new title at the museum for a program called CSTL Tours. And that kicks off on July 6th, and that is a series of almost every day of the week, a walking tour, and then eventually there will be bus tours and more. We also have virtual tours that are kind of like these, but on steroids, in the sense that they will have interactive elements and we will have discussion and conversation, and they'll be very, very lively, hopefully, and create kind of a small group atmosphere. So I encourage you to, if you enjoy these, to look at the virtual tours, and they can be found at mohistory.org. All right, so let's get started on heading up and down Broadway. So, long road, long history. So Broadway is, while not the oldest street in St. Louis, that would be First Street or Rue Grande, or where the Arch is sitting now. But Broadway is one of the earliest ones, and it would have originally been Fifth Street. So this is a map from 1804. If you can see my pointer here, this would be, we've got the river is here, we've got the wharf, and we've got First Street, Second, Third, Fourth, and then out here is Fifth Street. And so you've got the Chateaus lived right here. The church, actually the church is here and the Chateaus lived here. And then we have, out here is Fifth Street that would later be Broadway. So it is this, and then I have a map from 1823. So within 20 years, the city has, really grown out of those bounds that Broadway or Fifth Street in 1804 were, but so it's just gonna be right around here is where that street is. So it's a street that, hugs the river and follows the bow and the curve of the city as it grows. And then we have one from 1880. So again, you're not really seeing Broadway, but it's down here, and you can just, again, see how it relates to the rest of the city and how, and by this point, 1880, it is stretched down here to Carondelet. So it's a road that stretches from tip to tip of the city. It does go over into the county on both sides. So it's a really great road to start this series with, because it's one that you can really time travel from the beginning of the city's history to the current time. It's a road that passes through almost most of our most historic areas in the city, north and south, and it offers glimpses into the deep past, as well as the current challenges and changes and things that are happening now. For each of the areas that we pass through, and I'm going to start us downtown and head south, and then we're going to come back downtown and go north. And for each of those areas that we pass through, I'm going to have some historic photography and maps and fun things like that. So in the modern street grid, which is kind of what you're seeing here, closest to what we have now, this Broadway from up here to down here is 17 miles long. And so down here, it ends at the entrance to Jefferson Barracks, and there it becomes Kingston Road. And then originally, if we were on Fifth Street in the mid 1800s, and we're on the Fifth Street, we would have head south for a little bit on Broadway, and then we would be on Carondelet Road, which would have been going to the next community south of St. Louis. And then if you were going north, you would have been going on Bellefontaine Road or Bellefontaine Road. And that refers to the fact that if you were headed north up here on that road, you were headed to a fort. And Fort Bellefontaine, which is a place you can go to now, or Fort Bellefontaine, many ways to say things in St. Louis. It is a fort and a later trading post that dates from the very early 1800s. It's a St. Louis County Park now. So the entire segment, though, is named Broadway in 1883. The city passed an ordinance. By that time, it had swallowed up, most of all of the land that it crosses now. And so in 1883, it's all Broadway by that point. Okay. So to begin with, like I said, we're going to start downtown, which is where our downtown walking tour will be starting. If you're ever on one of our CSTL walking tours, this is where they all start, downtown. Okay, so we're going to head south on Broadway from here. We're on the courthouse steps. We're going to fly in my fancy plane that I have. And obviously, we only have about 10 minutes for each section, north and south, so I can't wander through every block and point out every fun thing along the way. So I've picked about 5 to 6 stops going south and 5 to 6 going north that kind of highlight some stuff that you wouldn't normally find in the history books, in the guidebooks, things that are a little less known to everyone. It's always my hope that I will, give people information that when they're driving in their cars, they can impress everybody in the car with some little factoids. So the first stop we're going to make is here. So we've got Broadway running here. This is where it splits into 4th Street. So we've got Broadway, the river is down here, and we've got Chouteau Avenue running right here. So Soulard Market way over here. But what we have right here, if you can see up close, and if you can't, it's definitely something to check out on Google Maps. Right here where the highway passes, there's a little bitty street called French Market Court. And that's what it's named now. There's a street sign there. And what it refers to is actually French Market that was sitting right here. If you see where my pointer is, in the corner of 4th and Convent, right here. So this would have originally been actually Sacred Heart Convent that was here, but French Market was sitting right there. A little confusing, but so French Market was south of this French Market Court. So right here was French Market. It was a beautiful building, and it was in direct competition with Soulard Market. So French Market was known as South Market or French, while Soulard was several streets away. So the Soulard Market. This market was built in 1829, and it actually made it until just about the turn of the century as a market. And then developers tried some different things. They looked at maybe making it into some kind of shopping destination, like an outdoor mall, way before that was a thing. But finally, by the Great Depression, the area was done, business was done there, and it was demolished. But we can find it in an 1875 Compton and Dry map, which is my very favorite thing in the whole wide world. But so this map, this is a plate and if you haven't seen this map, highly recommend you spend several weeks looking at it like I do. We have the river down here, and it's a map that details every single street and house and horse and little thing that's happening in St. Louis in 1875. So this is one of those plates. And right here is where the French Market can be seen. I can zoom in there so you can see that building a little bit better. And so we have the convent is here. The French Market Court is running over there. But yeah, this is the market hanging out there. And then I have a photograph from 1872. Now this is actually looking, north from south of the market. So here's the market on that corner. Here's the convent across the street and French Market Court, the street that we have there. And this is Broadway running through here. So 1872, I mean, gosh, like look at how densely those buildings are packed in compared to what they look like now. And then I have an image from, so we're gonna move, actually let's move a little bit south. So that's French Market Court, or French Market. Let's head a little bit south from there. So the area that we're looking at now, if we head south on Broadway, and we've got the river again over here, Broadway running here, and Soulard Market over here. This is LaSalle Park. This is also an area we visit on our Soulard walking tour. We spend a lot of time over in this little hidden pocket of a neighborhood. So the area we want to look at right here in this corner, if you were over there in your car, this street running here is called Rutgers Street. And Rutgers actually runs quite a ways north into LaSalle Park, into up into Benton, it runs west into the city. So Rutger, the name, actually refers to a lady named Madame Pelagie Rutger. And she was a member of the mid-19th century Black elite in St. Louis. And this was a real thing in St. Louis culture at the time. Her mother had been a slave, but she herself was not. She married a free man. And through that marriage, she actually accumulated a lot of wealth and a lot of land and added to that after his death. At her wealth at his height was $500,000. I mean, that's amazing at that time. And she's an example of, again, a piece of St. Louis high society in the mid 1800s, free people of color who were the descendants of mulattoes freed during the Spanish period. So that's where they are. And there's actually a great book and a great reference called The Colored Aristocracy of St. Louis. And this book was written in the 1830s, and it was written by a man named Cyprian Clay Morgan. And Clay Morgan is one of the main names in this piece of society, a family name. And Cyprian writes this book as if he's walking down the street, and he's kind of pointing at houses, and he's like, oh, so-and-so lives here. And, here's the story on them. And this lady, she's fallen out of society because of something she said at a dinner party last year. It is a great read, and also a really great little insight into St. Louis, into this time period in St. Louis history. And here's that same corner. So we're running Broadway right here. It's the same corner there. And we're in the 20th century. All right. So now we're going to fly south again. And where we are headed right down here. So we were here. We were headed south. We're going to pass Soulard Market into Kosciuszko. We're going to pass Kosciuszko. And we're going to come right here, right past the highway. So we were here in our cars. The Lindt Brewery and Anheuser-Busch are all right here. And this is 55. And this is just a on and off ramp. And as you're driving south on Broadway, you would notice a street right here called Cave Street, which a lot of people are familiar with the fact that caves run all throughout St. Louis. They kind of are famous in South St. Louis because of the beer caves and lagering and all of that history, but there are actually caves all throughout our area. But so Cave Street referred to a very specific one. It refers to the Cherokee Cave. And there was a man, so there's a brewery, let's say there's a brewery complex there at the turn of the century. There is a man in 1945 named Lee Hess. And he purchases a piece of what was once part of the brewery, and he turns it into a tourist attraction because it has an entrance to the Cherokee Cave, into one of the caves there. He also purchases the Damonil Mansion and has his dreams of a tourism complex there. And his tourist attraction, he wants to highlight the natural beauty of the caves and the geology and the archaeology and things that have been found there. He also has exhibits from the Chicago and St. Louis World's Fairs that he has brought to his museum, to his exhibition things. This is a really cool tourist attraction. And this is the building as it was before it was demolished for the highway to run right through there. So again, there it is, and then you can see it modernized. And then in 1960, it was demolished for the highway. So when you're driving on Broadway, you will see Cave Street. Okay. Before we head south, so we were right here in this little mound right there. If we were to head south, we would be passing a neighborhood called Marine Villa. And while, St. Louis has almost a countless number of neighborhoods throughout it with very interesting names that we don't know, a lot of them referred to, Marine Villa is one that was named in 1968. And the name refers to the fact that a lot of rivermen used to live here. And this is because of, there was a hospital here from the 1800s known as the Marine Hospital. And the Marine Hospital was quite a large complex. It has a neat history to it itself. The community and everything around it is what grows up. It's kind of a streetcar community and a commercial district along Broadway, that grows up after the city, after St. Louis annexes Carondelet, and this becomes a major traffic wave into the 20th century. So that's where Marine Villa kind of gets sliced off over here into a little chunk, but that's what that neighborhood is. This area right here is also the southern end of what was known as the St. Louis Commons. Common fields are a part of the original planning structure of the city, of the village, and they all had different names. There's the Grand Prairie Commons, there's several different names, and there's one called the St. Louis Commons. St. Louis Commons was a French-owned Indian reservation land, and it was created in 1836, and then later opened up for development in more modern times. Okay, so let's head past. And I highly recommend, again, if you're in your car and I've inspired you to head south on Broadway, to turn into these streets and turn into this neighborhood and see some of this architecture, because it's a really fascinating little neighborhood. So here's some fun stuff. So again, we're headed south on Broadway still. We are almost to Carondelet. And there's three things in a row here that I would want to point out. The first is the Carey Ellickson Geithner home. And that sign would be pretty prominently displayed there. We're going to fly down. So the Geithner home was originally the boathouse for the Western Rowing Club. And that's south down here. So you have the Geithner home that was a rowing house. You have this long stretch of suburban homes. And then you have a building just past that called the Altenheim, the St. Louis Altenheim. Just kind of sliding us south here. And there is the Altenheim is back. Is this building, this modern building back here, before you turn into Belle Reve Park. So the couple of things. The long stretch of suburban housing has a street called Chateau's Bluff. And that's because this land, this city, we had the boathouse, and then you had a piece of land that actually had one of the Chateau family's mansions sitting right here where the Altenheim is, and that was for Charles Chateau. And there was a group of upper-class German citizens that formed an association called the Altenheim Association in the late 19th century, but they form an association to take care of elderly people as part of their community. And these are not necessarily destitute elderly people. These are just people who are at a place where they can no longer keep a home. And so they purchased the mansion, and this is a story from the Post-Dispatch in I think 1903, early 1900s. And we've got the couple that bought the mansion, and then they added on to it and turned it into the Altenheim. And it was replaced in the 1970s by the more modern building. On the other side of the bluff, overlooking the river, and this is literally just right over from where this building would have been, you had these structures hugging the bluff. So now if you were to go to Belle Reve Park, there's a lot of brush, but you can see over to the river. But this originally would have been the different things that were hanging off of the bluff. And so these were homes, and then people had staircases and structures to get down to here, so they could take a train into the city. I want to point out the nice onion dome, onion turret over here. So it's just a neat little piece of St. Louis architectural history that modern St. Louisans can't imagine. Okay. Now let's head into Carondelet. So Carondelet, this is taken from a lithograph, actually. It's a daguerreotype of a lithograph. So this is Carondelet, very early days. You can definitely see that it's almost rural, not a very urban setting. So Carondelet was founded in 1767, so just a few years after St. Louis was founded. Originally, it was known as Dolores Village. That was the last name of the man that founded the little village. So Dolores Village. Then it was known as Catalan's Prairie for a while. Then it was known as Louisburg, Louisbourg. For a while, it was that as well. And then it became Carondelet during the Spanish period and named after a Spanish baron. So it's incorporated in 1832. And one of the first major industries, and for a long time, the major industry there is metal and mineral refining, but lead processing was one of the first big things that happened there. It was a major part of their economy for quite a while. And that starts in the 1840s. And it becomes part of St. Louis in 1870. It is officially annexed as part of St. Louis. And then you have South St. Louis and Carondelet start to merge. And there are a lot of articles in the local newspapers throughout that end of the 19th century into the early 20th century, that periodically you see citizens writing about what does that mean that these two things are coming together, and when you can no longer tell when one starts and one stops. So one little site we're going to see in Carondelet, and again, there is a virtual tour called Making It that's coming up in just a few weeks, and we will be regularly offering that virtual tour. And Making It is about manufacturing history in St. Louis, and it will factor in a whole lot more stuff about Carondelet. So I'm going to zoom us in real quick onto Broadway to see a landmark that is hiding in plain sight. I drop my little guy here, little person on the corner. He's going to fly down into Carondelet. And I'm going to give you a quick view of just Broadway street view. You can really see that a lot of that streetscape, late 19th century, early 20th century streetscape is intact. A lot of it is gone, but there is some really good stretches of commercial architecture there. So we're going to zoom in on the South Public Market. And what does really zoom in on that structure there? Because you can see there's a modern appendage on the front. But the South Public Market is one of the oldest public markets in St. Louis. There's only a handful left of these structures, but it's still being used as a market. And this was built in 1869, so earlier than the structure that's at Soulard Market now. And it is still being used as, even though it's privately owned, it is a market now. More of a 7-Eleven type market, but still, it's built in 1869, so before Carondelet is annexed into St. Louis. And it is on land that was originally part of a Spanish land grant. And here is that same building later, or in an earlier time period. All right, so now we're going to fly back up north to the courthouse, and we're going to turn ourselves north. And again, just like with Broadway headed south, we're going to just pick out a few sites and talk about how the street changes. So we're down at the courthouse, turn our little digital airplane around, zoom in, and head north onto, again, Bellefontaine Road or Bellefontaine Road. And that could, again, originally is referring to a fort, and later the cemetery that is along that way. So heading north on Broadway, just a few streets, we're going to get this image here. So this is a view of Broadway looking north toward the Union Market. So Union Market is here, and this is one of the city's main markets in the more modern times. It's the corner of Broadway and Morgan Street. Morgan Street is now known as Convention Plaza. And we've got a tea company over here, a drug company, an importer of human hair, actually, at 708 North Broadway. So a lot going on here. And you also have Famous. So this is an early iteration of the Famous and Bar, before it was Famous and Bar. We have the Famous dry goods store. So this was built this one is built in 1866. By 1883, the city of St. Louis had 7 markets similar to this throughout the city, but this was the most modern one always. They kept it up to date, and it was one of the sights of the city, as one 19th century writer says, one of the sights of the city is the crowds, the light, the display, and the traffic at Union Market, especially on Saturday evening. It's a really great little insight there. In 1924, by the early 20th century, they had decided this was a disgrace to the city, actually, and they needed a more modern facility. So they, just a street away, they built, this is in the 1920s, they built the Union Market. And this building's cool because you can go there now and sleep. It is now a hotel. It is a Drury Hotel. And this is that the more modern version of the Union Market. This all would have been open, and just, yeah, super cool. It was a full city block, and it was a market for over 50 years. Let's head north a little bit further. So for the next thing, again, this part where I wish I could talk for hours is on the Making It tour, but we're looking at here is just near North, it's called near North Riverfront. The Stan Musial Bridge would be just off screen. This is the Cotton Belt building. This is a place that we do visit later when we are offering bus tours. And we're going to go back to 1875. So keep kind of this image, this modern image in mind. And this is what we had in 1875 there. There's the density of industry, homes, some things to point out. The thing about the 1875 map is, you'll see down here, there's a lot of these buildings have little numbers and there's a key at the bottom. So we have a tenement building here. We have giant sugar refinery here that also had an artesian well. It's a whole other story that we could talk about. And there's a shot tower. This is the St. Louis Shot Tower, and it was a nationally known massive shot tower. And shot is the lead shot, like for ammunition. So this is that same area now. Okay, and let's head north from here. So we're passing that. So that's what we were just looking at. Next thing we're going to look at is there's a little marker that now is off to the side. It's right here, but it used to be in the middle of Broadway. They've moved it, so it's not in its original location, nor is it in the original location of what it memorializes. But if you take this little street, the Stan Musial Bridge here, there's this little rock here, and it's a little boulder, and it has a little sign, and it is commemorating what was known as the Big Mound. So the city of St. Louis, known as the Mound City before it was the Gateway City, the Mound City refers to the fact that we had Native American mounds throughout the city, not just over in Cahokia, but throughout this entire area. Even as late as the early 20th century, they were still removing Native American mounds, because when they had to get Forest Park ready for the World's Fair, they took down several mounds that are now where Art Hill, or we think of as Art Hill, actually had several Native American mounds there. And the archaeologists that did that collected everything that he found in those mounds and sent them to Harvard. So that's where they are now, being kept somewhere in a dusty box, I'm sure. Right, so I have an image of the big mound. So this was the largest of the mounds, and this is what that boulder is commemorating. And there is still one mound left, by the way, and that's Sugarloaf Mound in South St. Louis. So this was the largest mound, and it was 30 feet tall and 150 feet long. So it's factors in prominently in paintings of the early city. You could see it from the river as you were traveling. It's quite a landmark. And for a little while, there was a house on top of it. There was actually, the first house was owned by the first Postmaster General of St. Louis. He had a house up there. And then it's torn down in 1869 as the city needs that land. So this is as it's coming down. And here's one of the last images of that dirt. Okay, so now we're going to head north. Just north of here, I just want to point out a few buildings. So you've got Old North St. Louis and St. Louis Place over here, Crown Candy. And a lot of these businesses over here are family businesses that have been around for more than a century. Of Mallinckrodt Pharmaceuticals from the 1840s. Gunther Salt is from the turn of the 20th century. And you also have a bedding company up here called Star Bedding that's been around since the 1840s. So while there's a lot of different industry going on up here, there's a lot of history and a lot of things that have been there for a very long time. All right, so we're gonna head north a little bit further. We're gonna pass through the North Riverfront area. There is a Bellefontaine Cemetery. Oh, this is O'Fallon Park, actually. And then you have Bellefontaine Cemetery there. My airplane is kind of wobbly this morning. Okay, so we're going to land in Baden. And Baden is the northernest tip of Broadway. And this is a community I personally have been driving through a lot lately to learn more about. I'm gonna point out the waterworks over here as well before we dive down. Keep that in mind. So this is Broadway when you get to Baden, and you will have just passed under some under train tracks, and you're headed into Baden. And suddenly you are in another world, and it's a very intact streetscape. This originally would have been German immigrants or descendants of early German St. Louisans. It became part of St. Louis in 1876, so not too long after Carondelet. Originally only had 400 people, and again, mostly German Protestant and German Catholic. So I just wanted to show you, this is this modern streetscape. This is exactly what it looks like now. So the waterworks in Baden, this was a major part of the early industry there. In 1898, the city puts a pumping station there just south of the Chain of Rocks. And that pumping station is something that had kind of neat connection to life in Baden. The waterworks provided parks near the pumping station and quite a cool collection of greenhouses that if you go to the St. Louis Public Library's digital collections and just type in Baden, there are a lot of great photographs of these greenhouses that they would offer for people to come see. And they lemon trees and tropical plants and all kinds of neat stuff that were maintained by the waterworks there. In 1960, the pumping station becomes modernized and is no longer needed, and that is something, it's abandoned there at Baden. Okay, and the last thing on the slide here is, this is a clipping. There's two of them here. So there's a man named Archibald Chapin, and he is someone who writes for the St. Louis Republic in the late 19th century, early 20th century, very early. And he goes to different neighborhoods and he sketches little personal sketches. So like this one here, you've got Mr. or Mrs. M.E. Robinson, who tells him, do not draw my picture for your paper, but he does it anyway. And you've got these two girls that he gives a little, descriptions of them and just some little street scenes. He does this for Carondelet. He does it for downtown. There's a great collection of these. And again, this is Archibald Chapin for the St. Louis Republic. Highly recommend digging through these to see just a neat insight into life in St. Louis at that time and along throughout the city. So that is my presentation on Broadway as a street. And again, in the future, we'll be doing Kings Highway and then Grand Avenue as well.
All right, thanks again for watching today's CSTL. Thanks again to Amanda for a fascinating look at Streets of St. Louis, Broadway. And remember that you can find the full schedule of CSTL and STL History Live on the Missouri Historical Society website and Facebook page. Thanks again.